A row has erupted over where to educate children with special educational needs. It's been sparked by Mary Warnock, widely credited as the architect of the policy to educate children with special needs in mainstream schools. It's nearly 30 years since her groundbreaking report helped open the doors of mainstream schools to SEN children. Government policy now advocates educating only those with the most severe difficulties in special schools. So 89%, some 1.3 million children with special needs, attend mainstream schools today. But now, in an apparent U-turn, Baroness Warnock has made the controversial claim that many of these children might be better off in special schools after all.
I think it's plain now that the notion of inclusion of all children in the same school is actually not working in a very large number of cases. I mean, there have been two very, very critical reports which, in a way, inspired me to write a pamphlet, and one was from the Audit Commission, who suggested that the notion of statements for some children and not others ought to be looked at again and perhaps had outlived its usefulness. And there was an extremely critical Ofsted report on how children who had disabilities of various kinds were actually getting on in mainstream schools, and the answer was dire, actually. It was really very alarming.
Mary Warnock's latest statements and these recent reports have reignited a heated debate about inclusion. This programme examines whether her concerns are justified, investigating current policy and practice, as well as hearing from a range of parents, schools and campaigners.
I think I was horrified like everybody else. It seemed it was founded on so little information. It had nothing to do with the world as I know it to be.
The pendulum may well have swung too far, and that having only inclusion does not provide the safety net for the more vulnerable and more sensitive in society that need it.
She's missing out on the deep and full human rights arguments and the social arguments. And I would ask Baroness Warnock, where would she draw the line on inclusion of disabled kids in mainstream schools? Who is in and who is out?
The 1970 Education Act finally ended the exclusion from school of children because of their impairments and embedded in law their right to education in schools, albeit mostly in special schools. The 1978 Warnock Report and the 1981 Education Act then paved the way for the inclusion policy we have today. The government says only those at the severe end of the scale should be educated in special schools. However, Baroness Warnock herself now disagrees.
Special schools have got this reputation, and government constantly reinforces this by saying, of course we must keep special schools. They are essential for the most severe and complex disabilities. And that is where I think the great mistake lies, because I think there is a place for special schools for children whose disabilities are not so profound, not so permanent, but who simply cannot settle down to learn in an ordinary school. And one of the most depressing things in the world, I think, is to hear a teacher or to hear of a teacher who says to a parent about her child, well, I think she's coping, I think she's managing. That schools should be places where people learn what fun it is to learn things and be able to do something you couldn't do yesterday. And of course, just containing a child or having a child there who can just about keep her head above water is not enough.
However, various pro-inclusion lobbyists argue that it not only works, it works well. They also insist inclusion is the only fair way forward.
What's important about completely inclusive education is that it is ending hundreds, if not thousands of years of mistreatment and prejudice against people who have needs that are considered different to the majority of people. The new Baroness Warnock paper was very disappointing and shocking almost, because it seemed to be based on such a little piece of evidence, you know, believing that she knew, when it had nothing to do with the reality that we know on the ground, the wonderful things that are going on in mainstream schools, the efforts teachers have put into it, the benefits to children, both disabled and non-disabled children. And it seemed it was like a blow in the face of progress.
The difference between Micheline Mason's daughter's educational experiences and her own served to illustrate this progress.
I was incredibly isolated at home. I took my 11 plus at home, which happened in those days, passed, but was then told I shouldn't have been told that I'd got such a good score because there was no school I could go to.
I went to mainstream school ever since I went to preschool, nursery school, and I always went to school within my local community, so it meant I really managed to make good, strong friendships early on with people that lived nearby to me, which have kind of sustained themselves. And my life would look completely different if I hadn't been in mainstream education. I don't doubt it. I was one of a very small group of young people at the time that had that opportunity, and now I'm part of a very small group of young people that are going into higher education and are kind of getting to go out into the world. But it's clear to me that most of my peer group are not doing what I'm doing.
Baroness Warnock's main concern, though, is not about whether mainstream schools should include physically disabled children such as Lucy, but whether they're right for those with behaviour so challenging it risks getting in the way of learning.
Some of them are children with severe behavioural difficulties that have increased because of their failure at school. And so therefore, by the time they get to secondary school, they've given up on the whole idea of learning. It just isn't seen. Whatever the actual cause of that is, they need to go to an environment which will enable him to learn. Because if children have a right by law to education, then it seems to me they have a right to be provided with somewhere that makes education possible.
In fact, the SEN and Disability Act 2001 placed legal duties on mainstream schools to make reasonable adjustments to ensure pupils with impairments were not put at a disadvantage. But the question is, how well have they managed to do this? The government asked pro-inclusion charity Disability Equality in Education to examine what makes for good practice. They concluded that success depended primarily on a positive attitude within the management of a school.
The thing that made the difference was there was a willingness to try. There was an ethos where people thought it was a human rights issue, that these children should be here, they live in our community, and we will transform our school, remove the barriers, develop techniques, we'll actually develop education for them, and we will support peer integration, peer support. Now, if you do those sorts of things with strong leadership from the school, there is no reason at all why it can't happen. The key issue for us as disabled people and in transforming education to inclusion is to recognise the difference between what we call medical model thinking, which sees the problem in the person, what's wrong with them, to see actually the problem is the barriers that beyond the person, barriers in the environment, barriers in the way we teach, barriers in language, and we need to remove those barriers to give people the rights and entitlement they have to access education alongside their peers.
Glossopdale in Derbyshire was one school judged to have got it right. The school has a long history of inclusion going back to the 1970s following the original Warnock report, with its success apparently countering Baroness Warnock's arguments.
There are several things that make inclusion work. One of the things from the school's point of view is that you need to have a senior management team who are very much behind inclusion, because that then filters down to the rest of across the rest of the school. And we have that here and have had for a long time. But we also have teaching staff who are very committed to it in all sorts of ways, not just the special needs staff, but the subject colleagues across. What we do works because the subject colleagues want to work with us on that. The children are part of all ability tutor groups, so although they might come out now and again for small group work to do with basic skills, if that's their difficulty, our main philosophy is that they're in school with everyone else, working alongside their peers, benefiting from the teaching of the main subject teachers, but with support in the classroom so that they can access what it is that's going on.
Glossopdale has nearly 2,000 students spread over 3 sites. It's fully comprehensive with the full range of abilities from students striving to reach basic literacy standards to those gaining entrance to top universities.
There are 40 staff on the special needs team. Of those, 12 are teachers and the other 28 are teaching assistants. Some of the teaching staff are linked to year groups, and they have an overview of the statement of students and all the students with special needs in that year group, and they'll go up through the school with them, so they get to know them very well. Other members of the team are linked to curriculum areas, so they'll work with those areas looking at curriculum differentiation, delivering, again, in-class support. And then we have some teachers who are behaviour specialists who work with those with challenging behaviours, and the teaching assistants are split between those 3 teams.
And with this level of commitment and resource, it appears they can succeed with children with a broad range of special needs. Gemma has Down syndrome.
Gemma's thoroughly enjoying it. She's working very hard, she's coping with her homework, she's continuing to mix, she's made new friends, she comes home from school very happy and seems to be learning a great deal, so she's settled in very well, even though she's only been here for 1 term. So we're very, very pleased with that. She's able to write, she's able to read, she's able to mix. She goes out to friends' houses for parties regularly, and that wouldn't be possible if she hadn't mixed with ordinary kids.
Even more complex special needs can be supported. Matthew is visually impaired, has learning difficulties and problems with his speech.
Matthew's not a delicate child. From being young, he's been involved. He does most activities that most other children do to a very good standard. He's always been pushed. Academically, he's not as good as most children, but he's prepared to work. He works hard and he tries his best, and that's all I can ask for. And as long as he has that support to work with him, which he does here at Glossopdale, then I'm happy with that. I think being at Glossopdale will prepare Matthew far better to going into the outside world, possibly working, than he would have been prepared had he been in a special school.
However, Glossopdale's success doesn't necessarily reflect what happens elsewhere in the country. The 2001 SEN and Disability Act may have strengthened the rights of children with special needs to an education in a mainstream school, but what's provided for them depends on where they live.
We think it's crazy that a child in South Tyneside is 24 times more likely to be placed in a special school than a child in the London Borough of Newham. Parents and their advocates and also teachers tell us this is a really crazy and inadequate way of interpreting the same law. We asked the Secretary of State to intervene and to write to the high segregating education authorities and to maybe meet with them and say, what is going on here? Your interpretation of the law is very different to many other education authorities in the country. And her department, has written back saying things are in place, there are local circumstances, and interpretation of the law will vary according to these local circumstances.
And the level of SEN resources mainstream schools have also varies across the country.
To use your capital letters, mind in full stops.
13-year-old Lewis settles down to do his schoolwork. However, he won't be going anywhere near a classroom. Lewis, who lives in South Gloucestershire, has attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. His mother Hayley has taken him out of the Grange, his mainstream school near Bristol, because she's unhappy with his progress.
Different to working in a school. You haven't got those people around you chatting to you, and you can't make mistakes really. Chatting to people and getting told off. Right, the teacher will explain it to you, and she'll say, well, go on then, and I'm like, well, miss, I get that, and she just, well, go on then and do it, and I just, once I can't do something, I blank it, that's me.
The Grange school gave Lewis 7.5 hours a week of extra support, However, Hayley says that's not enough.
Last year, his reading age was 7 years and 5 months. A year on, it's 7 years and 6 months. So at this rate, he'll still be leaving school with a reading age of 7 years and 9 months.
Right.
Which to me is not good enough.
That's no good for nobody.
It's you know, he's not going to get very far.
The ratio of dedicated staff to pupils with SEN varies from one school to another. While Glossopdale has 1 member of staff to every 6 SEN pupils, the Grange has only 1 to 11, although the Grange's latest Ofsted report says the school does well with children with SEN. In a statement, the school said,
"Increased learning support would help Lewis improve his organisational skills. The level of funding available to schools is not yet at a level where all students' social and emotional needs can be met."
I won't blame the Grange for what they've done, because the Grange has done a lot. But
they're limited, aren't they?
They're limited with money. But if the LEA would put funds in, for not just my son, there's other children in the Grange who's got difficulties, not just like Lewis. And you know, they got just as much chance as the rest of the pupils at that school.
Lewis's family are also unhappy about the limitations they see in the national curriculum.
He don't need to be learning French or Italian when he don't know his actual English himself. If they could give him more lessons on more probably maths or English instead of everything else, then I think he would have more of a chance of learning a bit better.
Some special schools argue that their expertise and resources can make them much more appropriate for this sort of case than mainstream. This is Alderman Knight's School at Tewkesbury in Gloucestershire, a special school for children with moderate learning difficulties.
This school is organised in the same format at secondary level as any mainstream secondary school. It has the same national curriculum subjects, including the foreign language, and children move around from subject-based teachers throughout the school. The setting within the school is much more informal, small groups. We're able to observe children in their development and their social interaction. We're able to monitor their behaviours as well as their curriculum development, so that we're able to access their learning at a level that suits their needs, tailored curriculum, in a way that perhaps a large secondary school may not be able to manage this.
Jessica is one of Alderman Knight's 60 pupils. Like Lewis, she struggled in a mainstream school.
Jessica has a range of difficulties, primarily dyspraxia, but she has learning difficulties, finds it very hard to retain information, and generally has a reading ability and an overall ability that is roughly of an age 7 or 8 year old, and Jessica's currently 15. Jessica started off in mainstream school. She wasn't included with her lack of ability in certain areas and the approach that Jessica needed. She needed specialist teaching. She was becoming very distressed in a mainstream school. She would actually cling on to the car door, and we would try and pull her off to get her into school. The reason for choosing Alderman Knight was because straight away I could see that there were a range of techniques that the teachers had within their toolkit, if you like, that would try different things, and we hoped that that would unlock the door for Jessica.
The curriculum is meaningful to them. They're able to meet their targets and feel that they're succeeding, and they have a goal clearly to which they can achieve. Therefore, their self-esteem, self-worth, behaviour tends to be addressed within those goals.
But Alderman Knight's School is under threat of closure. Conservative leader David Cameron, a local MP and himself the parent of a disabled boy, was directly involved in the fight to prevent its closure. Despite a temporary reprieve, the school's future remains in the balance. This worries parents like Kim, the mother of 13-year-old Jake, who is autistic.
I was told, you don't stand a chance, the school is closing. There's no point sending him there if he's only going to be there for 2 or 3 years. I took the view that 2 or 3 years in a special school of what this school caters for is far better than sending Jake to a mainstream school where they wouldn't understand him.
I asked you a question, didn't I?
I know that bringing him here, he is included in everything that goes on, whether it's school trips, pantomimes, cooking, going out for the day. He's just included in everything. It's just like a normal school.
There have been concerns, categorically denied by the DFES, that the threat to Alderman Knight is simply an example of a national policy to reduce special schools provision as part of the inclusion agenda. Not only is Baroness Warnock clearly against any reduction in special school capacity, but some mainstream schools are also keen to retain this provision. Alderman Knight's close neighbour is Tewkesbury Comprehensive School, which has 240 children with special educational needs of its own. Despite the head teacher's own commitment to inclusion, he was one of the key campaigners to keep it open.
Alderman Knight is catering for children whose difficulties are too severe for a school like mine to cope with. And they are children whose difficulties make it impossible for them to cope with a school like mine. They find the whole thing too big, you know, they sort of get people blindness. They just can't cope, so they'll go and hide away in corners and they won't succeed in my school. In Alderman Knight, they will emerge with anything up to 5 or 6 GCSEs. It's a wonderful provision, and that's why I'm so dead keen to keep it.
Another measure Baroness Warnock now regrets is the Statement of Special Educational Needs. Introduced in the 1981 Education Act, the statement comprises a legally binding list of specific assistance and the school where the child should get it. It's become a parent's passport to getting help for their child.
That, of course, was a terrible, divisive thing to introduce, because just about in 1981, the date of that act, the education cuts became acute, or began to become acute, and local authorities were more and more strapped for money. And they, therefore, began to put into the statement as little as they could decently get away with, because they knew they had to provide whatever was in the statement. And, of course, that meant that parents, first of all, demanded statements of their children, because they thought that otherwise they wouldn't get any special help at all. And secondly, they began to be very critical of what was in the statement because they thought it wasn't enough.
Despite recent spending increases in education, similar problems remain today. Many statements are contested, and parents who disagree with the LEA's decision need determination and money to challenge it.
Recently, the parents who have been able to send their children to this school have been the parents who have pushed open doors through going to see paediatricians, educational psychologists, or even to tribunals where they have wanted alternative provision because their placement within the mainstream, for whatever reason, has not been satisfactory. And therefore, the parents are often more articulate and middle class than they have been in the past.
The government's SEN strategy signals a shift towards phasing out statementing in favour of directly funding schools to support children with special needs. In the interim, however, some parents remain dissatisfied.
They have to have so many points to have a statement funded, and I'm under the impression that he falls about 12 points below. And so, as far as we're concerned, the statement really isn't worth the piece of paper it's written on. If it's not funded, why bother have a statement at all?
Baroness Warnock's recent declarations on special educational needs have prompted a cross-party select committee inquiry in Parliament, and statementing is one area under examination.
What on earth is going on in statementing? You know, how does statementing work? Why is it that some parents who can afford to challenge a statement in court can, if they could, pay 10, 15, 20,000 pounds, can get a statement changed, or can get a statement, can challenge the refusal to statement a child? And what happens if you haven't got that money? So statementing there's a very big question about what exactly is happening there. Who does get a statement, who doesn't?
Another contentious issue the committee has decided to look into is how the government's SEN strategy fits in with its commitment to parental choice.
If it's right in mainstream education or education that is not to do with special educational needs, it is also right here, and it's special education. And as far as we possibly can arrange it, I think special education has to give that amount of choice, as far as we can, to those parents.
However, not everyone thinks that in the long run, choice will be best for the children involved.
We don't think parents should have the choice of choosing separate special school. We think it's a children's rights issue, and you have to think of the outcome into mainstream society when a child has finished their education.
And when you're talking about parental choice, you're undoubtedly also talking about the league tables which inform that choice.
League tables and all the testing and all the other things which go on, which are trying to make schools compare themselves to each other, compete with each other, and make people choose them on the basis of these very arbitrary results, are all anti-inclusion. They all make it much harder because they're following a different philosophy altogether. They're bringing in competition. Inclusion is about collaboration. It's about equality. It's about valuing all young people and bringing in the support that they need.
There are many special needs children, for example, those with visual difficulties, hearing impairments, Asperger's and so on, who are intellectually often very bright. They could have a very positive effect on school league tables. I suppose if you were to ask me statistically, it's probably the case that more of our special needs children have very basic learning difficulties that translate into particularly writing difficulties. That can make it very difficult for them to demonstrate what they're good at in a written exam. Now, of course, our whole education system and the dreadful league tables are based on written examinations, so they will not be pushing the league table statistics upwards.
The competitiveness of schools makes it essential that if there's a bit of money to spend, it's going to be spent on an extra teacher for the people who might get a few more A-levels if they had such teaching. The league tables seem to be one of the really harmful things that's happened to schools.
Baroness Warnock's recent publication has stirred up considerable debate, and Barry Sheerman's Select Committee investigation may come up with answers to questions over the future of inclusion. However, with the apparent effect of league tables and the limited available resources, what will happen to pupils like Lewis?
But as the curriculum stands, it's not for Lewis. And so we're in a sort of a catch-22 because he doesn't seem to fall into any category at the moment.
He's just going to go nowhere when he leaves school because he's just so...
He's so far behind, isn't he?
That's just an understatement. He's just... Well, he is. He's so far behind. You know, I've got a 7-year-old daughter and he struggles reading her books. So what does that say when things that... He can't do things like that? And I do worry about it immensely.